don't say a word. Just watch.
Hello, welcome to the podcast of Kabbalah Vision, the connection point between the order of the invisible world and our souls. I am Luri, your guide who will accompany you on this journey of wisdom today. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we have a mission that's pretty specialized, but I think it's going to be incredibly rewarding, especially for those of you who are already comfortable with the, let's say, the cosmic architecture of Kabbalah.
Right, and the Lurianic system in particular.
Exactly. We're moving past the initial, the big drama of Adam and Eve, and we're going to zero in on the Zohar's really radical and frankly often shocking reading of what happened next.
We're taking what seems like a simple list, the genealogies in Genesis 5, figures like Enoch, the incredible age of Methuselah, and then Noah's arrival. And we're not treating it as history.
No, not at all.
We're treating it as a spiritual roadmap. The goal here is to chart the collapse and then the slow, really arduous reconstruction of the cosmic order.
It's like we're mapping the spiritual architecture of the entire pre-flood world. We're looking at this whole era through the lens of Shavira, the shattering, which of course all started with that foundational flaw of Adam Harishon. We really need to understand the states of separation, the states of potential rectification that define those millennia before the waters came. So this deep dive is all about seeing the biblical text as a schematic for cosmic evolution.
And to do that, we absolutely have to start with the agent of negativity itself, the serpent. Because the Zohar doesn't just see it as a creature, it portrays it as the source code of the spiritual crisis. It's the point of origin for all the structural flaws that eventually made the flood necessary.
Okay, let's unpack that then, this genesis of wrath and death. Because everything that follows, all the genealogical failures, they're direct consequences of that initial manipulation. The Zohar's take on the serpent is so much more chilling than just a metaphor for temptation.
It's the embodiment of separation. That's the key. The serpent is explicitly named as the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, and even more frighteningly, the angel of death.
The angel of death.
Yes. The source texts are clear. It was the serpent that brought death, characterized by wrath, which is af and anger, into the world. This wasn't just some metaphysical damage. It was the introduction of a functional, destructive spiritual mechanism into creation.
And the method of temptation is where the Zohar gives us this incredibly deep technical insight. It wasn't just about offering forbidden fruit or knowledge. It targeted the very structure of the divine.
It did. It promised access to the mechanics of creation itself by cleaving to the feminine principle.
So that's the crucial detail.
That's the key distinction, yes. The serpent's claim was that the tree of knowledge, which is identified with the feminine principle of Zir Anpin, or Malchut, was the actual tool the Holy One used to create the world.
A lie wrapped in a kernel of truth.
Precisely. It reframed the transgression. It wasn't just disobedience. It was being sold as a shortcut to creative power.
So when it promised Adam and Eve they would be as Elohim, knowing good and evil, that wasn't just an empty boast. It was implying they could actually bypass the proper supernal hierarchy.
Yes, and create worlds themselves. They could draw the abundance, the light, directly from the female principle, but do it inappropriately, before any real tikkun, any rectification had been achieved.
They tried to seize the light without the proper vessel.
Exactly, without the spiritual purification needed to handle that raw energy. And the consequence of trying to hijack the spiritual system like that was, well, it was immediate and catastrophic. The Zohar states that the serpent put an end to all flesh by taking the soul away from all the flesh.
Which leads to its secret name.
Its chilling secret name, the end of all flesh.
That one detail immediately frames the entire trajectory of the pre-flood world, doesn't it? The increasing mortality, the lifespans getting shorter over generations, the violence. It wasn't some arbitrary punishment.
Not at all.
It was the serpent functioning exactly as intended, systematically draining spiritual vitality from the physical plane because it had been empowered by that first flawed act.
Death becomes a structural necessity. It's a flaw introduced by the serpent, who now has this administrative function of separating soul from body. It's a consequence of unrectified cleaving.
Which means we need to take a small step back and look at the starting point, at Adam Harishon. To really get the chaos that follows, we have to remember his initial state. It was one of immense potential, but also inherent instability.
He was created as the completion of all creation. He initially contained everything, male, female, all subsequent souls. They were all within him. He was, as the text says, the unification into one wholeness, like a perfect spiritual capacitor.
But the configuration of that capacitor was flawed from the get-go. And this brings us right to that critical concept, acre be acre.
Absolutely. Adam was first created double-faced, male and female faces fastened back to back. The Zohar is very explicit that this was a state of profound loneliness, even within this supposed unity.
So he was alone because...
Because, as the text puts it, the female half, quote, did not gain favor with his wife, and she was not a help to match him. It was a unity without connection.
So this back-to-back state, acre be acre, it represents a spiritual relationship that's, I guess, supportive in a very limited sense. They're leaning on each other,
Right.
but they're incapable of any true generative union. They can't have hasaga or spiritual attainment in that state.
And that's the core tragedy. They shared a single wall of protection, but they couldn't achieve the face-to-face state, the penem state, which is absolutely required for the flow of the higher generative light.
It was only after she was separated and then repositioned.
Reposition penem, face-to-face, that true spiritual union even became possible.
And this repositioning is immediately followed by the first births. This is the genealogical foundation for Genesis 5.
Yes, the source is very specific. 2 came out and mated, and a total of 7 emerged. Cain with his twin sister, Abel with his 2 twin sisters, and then Adam and Eve. But this immediate physical world, this post-separation world, was already operating under the shadow of that flawed acre be acre state.
Okay, so this gets us to the spiritual mechanics of the imperfection. We know acre be acre means imperfect alignment. But what does that actually mean at the level of the Partsufim, the divine configurations? How does a structural flaw like that translate into a physically decaying world?
The Partsufim we're talking about are ZRN, that's Zir Anpin, the male principle, and Melchet, the female principle. When they are in this acre be acre state, they're imperfectly aligned. They're only sharing one wall between them, which offers only minimal spiritual protection.
And why is that shared wall not enough? Why can't they sustain creation in that posture?
Because in that back-to-back state, they are structurally deprived of the highest level of illumination. They get plunged into a state known as catnut.
Catnet, smallness.
Smallness or constriction, yes.
We hear that term a lot, but here it's not just a poetic description of spiritual lack. It sounds like a precise diagnosis of why the divine light couldn't flow properly into the physical world.
It is a precise diagnosis. The specific light that's blocked is the Hiarat Gar, the great lights. And they're distant because of what are called the 2 distances, which stem from the Akaram, the back parts of Bina and Keter.
Okay, so the highest regulatory system.
Think of Bina and Keter as just that, the highest regulators. When their back parts, the aspects associated with restriction and withdrawal, are dominant, then Zanan simply cannot receive the full, powerful, sustaining light that's necessary for stability.
So if Zana are operating on, I don't know, severely throttled bandwidth plunged into this catnut, then the world that those early generations inherited was structurally deficient from the very beginning.
It was.
It was like a pressure cooker, an environment where the spiritual immune system was just minimal.
Minimal and highly susceptible to chaos. This fundamental cosmic blockage reduced all the available spiritual vitality. It set the stage for the flawed existence of Cain's lineage and really for the massive burden that was put on Seth's line to try and fix it, to move Zanan from back to back to face to face.
So catnut means the defensive shield against the Sitra Akra, the other side.
It's minimal, which makes decay and moral corruption almost inevitable unless a constant, really extraordinary effort is applied.
But wait a second. If the world's spiritual architecture was that broken, if the lights were so distant and catnut was the reigning state, how could there be any spiritual vitality at all? I mean, Cain and Abel's lineage followed this collapse immediately. Why wasn't the flood instantaneous?
That is the perfect question. And the answer is where the longevity of those early figures becomes the crucial signpost. Yes, the structure was flawed, but the initial burst of creation still contained an immense amount of Or Yashar's straight light from the very highest levels.
Ah, okay.
The human task, even in a state of catnut, was to refine the vessels and turn that Or Yashar into Or Hoser returning light to fix the system. The long lives were the result of the residual spiritual energy from the level of Adam Kadmon, which was so close to the infinite that his energy didn't just dissipate instantly.
So their very existence was a race against the clock. They were fueled by this primordial energy that was, quickly running out.
Exactly. The pressure on them was immense. They inherited the greatest spiritual mission imaginable, fixing the Partsufim, while living in the absolute weakest spiritual structure.
This is where the Zohar just completely transforms that sparse genealogical record in Genesis 5. You have Methuselah living for nearly 1,000 years, Enoch walking with God, and then just disappearing. How does the Zohar interpret this almost impossible longevity in a world that was already spiraling toward divine annihilation?
The longevity is a subtle indicator. It points to their proximity to the source of creation itself, before the full spiritual degradation became completely overwhelming. Those long lifespans suggest they were still tethered, however tenuously, to the original, untainted spiritual structure.
Can we get more specific about that connection? How do you measure spiritual vitality or the perfection of the Partsufim in years of life?
The Zohar links spiritual vitality directly to the ability of the Partsufim to achieve perfection and receive light. And this perfection is represented by the emergence of the perfected Ruach.
The spirit.
The light of Ruach, yes, which is associated with Zir and Pin. And it only emerges when the three columns are balanced. Ruach comes from the central column, and that requires the precise combination of the right, which is cheesed, water, mercy, and the left, which is Gevurah, fire, judgment.
Okay. So their longevity suggests that they were somehow better at integrating mercy and judgment than the average person of their time.
It suggests they were connected to a phase of creation where that integration was more readily accessible. The early generations were absolutely living in a world that was becoming more and more susceptible to judgment, to Gevurah.
The left column dominating.
Right, because of the lack of mediation from a central column. And we see Gevurah characterized in the sources as darkness of the sun, like a shadow, and even a dark black fire.
That imagery, a dark black fire, is terrifying. It implies this sort of consuming severity, an unmediated judgment that just burns the vessel.
And that severity is exactly what was causing the world's rapid decay. But their long lives suggest they were still drawing sustenance from, or were at least closer to, the original untainted spiritual structure. The light that's associated with Adam Kadmon, or the Keter level. This is before the full severity of the Shavira, the shattering, really manifested in the lower worlds.
So their lifespan is a measure of the light retained from that primordial state.
It is. The world, you have to remember, was meant to exist for 7,000 years based on its original structure. Their longevity anchors them to that divine potential.
Which makes their eventual widespread moral failure all the more tragic. They had the time, hundreds of years, and they had this inherited spiritual energy, but they failed to complete the task.
The human purpose is unwavering, to complete the unification into one wholeness. Adam's descendants, Seth's line, which leads to Enoch and Noah, they inherited the mission to achieve that panem unity.
And the method was?
The goal was to be achieved through ethical action and what are called practical mitzvot. These actions facilitate the face-to-face coupling of Zilan.
So if the cosmic architecture was Acre be Acre, humanity's job was essentially to spiritually turn the faces forward, and the spiritual danger for those who failed this mission was, well, it was absolute.
Absolutely. The Zohar warns that whoever fails to complete the holy name below, which means failing to facilitate the unification of the Partsufim in the physical world through their actions, is deemed better off not having been created.
That spiritual weight really explains the catastrophic level of corruption that made the flood necessary. The failure wasn't just moral, it was architectural.
It was.
So let's look at the exception that proves the rule. Enoch. He's the figure whose life stands in such sharp contrast to all the decay around him. Genesis just says, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, for God took him, which implies this immediate, profound spiritual attainment. Hasaga.
Yes. His ascension implies he reached a level of Hasaga that was virtually unprecedented in that era of Katnut. And this level of attainment is fundamentally an internal process.
Internal how?
According to the teachings of Rabbi Chaim Vital, achieving the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, and the higher levels, is attained through profound humility and lowliness. It's not just about the mechanical performance of external actions.
So it wasn't enough to just do a good deed. The internal spiritual vessel had to be fully repaired and refined to allow for this kind of metaphysical ascent. And Kabbalah details the soul's ability to evolve during one's lifetime, which must be the actual mechanism for Enoch's transformation.
That mechanism is the core concept of Iber,
gestation or
Okay,
pregnancy.
exactly. The soul has 5 progressive levels. You have Nefesh, which is the lowest, then Ruach, Neshama, Haya, and Yeshida, the highest. Most people operate primarily on the Nefesh level.
So what does Iber involve in this context?
Iber is this process of soul evolution during one's lifetime. It's often associated with Gilgal Neshamat, with reincarnation, but here it means the person's soul is so refined that it can receive and integrate a higher soul level or a higher aspect of its own soul while still in the body.
It's like a spiritual pregnancy.
Yes. The person is hosting a higher frequency. Attaining Ruach, and especially Neshama, is achieved through this intense internal work of Iber.
That is a staggering concept. For Enoch to be taken by God, he must have achieved not just Ruach, but probably the Neshama level,
Very likely.
which is exceedingly rare even in rectified eras. It means he accomplished the full Tikkun of his personal vessel while the cosmic vessel was literally collapsing around him.
He was building his own panimmunity internally, regardless of the external Akor state of the parts of him in the world. And the fact that the sources so often associate Enoch's ultimate identity with Metatron, the Prince of the Presence, really speaks to the incredible result of this Iber.
Metatron, the divine administrator, that's a fascinating endpoint for human spiritual work.
It's the ultimate destiny for one who completes their spiritual evolution. Metatron is described in the mystical texts, specifically in 3 Enoch, as a judge and ruler over the heavenly hosts. He stands, or sits, at the door of the 7th hall and is connected to the recording of divine decrees.
So he takes on this profound administrative, even judgmental role in the supernal realms.
And that's the reward for achieving such complete personal hasaga. Enoch essentially ascended and became the spiritual mechanism for recording and executing divine justice, which was a necessary role, given the impending judgment of the flood.
So Enoch's life stands as proof that individual rectification, even when the macrocosmic structure is failing, is still possible, and that true spiritual integrity grants an escape from the decay of the Akor world.
Yes, he achieved the highest stability while everyone else was descending into chaos.
He was the one soul that successfully transitioned from that primordial light of the Keter level through the whole refinement process of Iber into a perfected state of Ruach and Neshama.
He completed the holy name below, and by doing so earned his eternal place above.
So the stage is now set for the cosmic reset. We have Enoch as the exception, but the general trend of the antediluvian world was this downward spiral, fueled by the structural deficiency, the Akor state, and the resulting catnut. How does the Zohar describe the final tipping point? What was the mechanism of decay that made the flood an absolute necessity?
The world decayed because people corrupted their ways, and this is explained through the concept of exile. When people sinned, when they corrupted their paths, they metaphorically pushed the Shekinah, the divine presence, which is identified with Malchorax, away from the world.
Pushing the Shekinah away, it sounds like spiritual abandonment, but I'm guessing the consequence, again, is structural?
It is the withdrawal of the spiritual force field. When Malchut is pushed away, the earth is left broken, and that allows another spirit, the Sitra Akra, the other side, to corrupt the world without any resistance. The Zohar teaches that the Sitra Akra is always just, hovering, waiting for an opportunity to dominate when the divine unity is lacking.
And the corruption of the early generations gave it the ultimate breach.
The ultimate breach.
The sources use a very powerful analogy for this physical and ethical breakdown, the plague of leprosy. This has to be more than just a literal disease.
Oh, it's a perfect metaphysical diagnosis of the pre-flood world. The plague of leprosy is interpreted as the combination of 2 severe spiritual conditions. The word plague signifies harsh judgment, and leprosy signifies a closing.
A closing of what?
A closing of the supernal light.
So the ethical collapse, the plague, was the direct result of the structural failure, the closing, the leprosy.
Exactly. It was a complete shutting off of divine goodness from descending into the world. The world was spiritually choked. When the light is closed off, only judgment is left, and that leads to moral decay and physical sickness. The spiritual task of the priest, which is detailed later in the Torah, is precisely to reverse this.
To open that closing.
To open the closing and kindle the lamps, the sephirah, to restore the flow of blessing.
But in the antediluvian world, there was no sustained spiritual infrastructure, no system of mitzvot established to perform this opening. So the closure became complete, which necessitated a radical cleansing reset. And this is where Noah finally enters as the sole figure of, well, partial rectification.
Noah is the survivor. He's the spiritual seed. He came and entered the Taiva, the ark. And the Zohar sees the ark, the taiva, not as a mere boat for safety, but as a kind of cosmic reboot. It contained the spiritual blueprint and the seed for a rectified world.
The blueprint.
Yes, the Zohar emphasizes that from the Ark, all generations of the world emerged and scattered. It housed the spiritual remnant that was capable of receiving the divine light once the immense necessary judgment had passed.
So the Ark, in a way, is Melchut in a temporary state of containment. It's preserving the seed of light until the severity of din of judgment subsides.
It is the ultimate act of preserving the vessel, the potential for future unity. Noah, being righteous in his generations, managed to draw just enough residual light to sustain that seed. But the process of the flood itself was pure din, a spiritual cleansing that reset the entire playing field.
And what about the promise after the flood? I will not curse the ground anymore for man's sake. What does that signify in this context? It almost sounds like God is changing his mind about the level of punishment.
It's not a change of mind. It's a change in the administration of judgment. It means that God will no longer give the kind of overwhelming judgments to the heavenly prosecutors that would utterly destroy the world again. Judgment will still happen, but it will be limited, only as much as the world and the remaining Partsufim can bear.
It's a shift from total annihilation to
restrained suffering and rectification through incremental spiritual work. The failure of those first generations was so total that nothing less than total destruction could purge the Sitra Achra that had taken root.
That makes the shift from the antediluvian to the post-flood era a move from a time of potential total failure to an era of constrained hope.
It establishes the principle that even though the spiritual structure is still marred by the initial Shavira and the Akor state, the complete destruction seen in the flood will not be repeated. Humanity is now entrusted with the slow, deliberate work of Tikkun without the imminent threat of total cosmic collapse hanging over their heads.
And the ultimate sign of that shift in restraint is the covenant with Noah, which is symbolized by the rainbow. This is one of the most compelling and dynamic symbols in the Zohar because it signifies both judgment and redemption at the same time.
The rainbow is absolutely seen as resting upon a supernal secret. It connects the lower physical world to the divine realms. But the Zohar emphasizes a crucial distinction about the rainbow's appearance in our current reality.
Which is?
Right now, in our present state of galut, of exile, the rainbow appears in dark colors.
Why dark colors? What's the spiritual content of a dark rainbow?
The dark colors signify that the rainbow's primary function is as a reminder. It's a covenant of restraint that's based on din, on judgment, to prevent the flood from returning. It represents the ongoing, necessary influence of judgment in the world. It's a containment mechanism.
So when we see a dark rainbow, we are actually seeing the divine presence, Malchut, sometimes called Zat or Isha, operating in its capacity as a judge during this time of exile.
Precisely. Malchut is described as including both white, which is mercy for Israel, and black, which is judgment for the nations, at midnight. The dark rainbow reflects that the Shekinah is still operating under the influence of necessary and often harsh judgments. It's a promise, yes, but it's a promise enforced by a kind of spiritual gravity, not by pure radiant beneficence.
Which immediately points to our future transformation, doesn't it? A time when din no longer needs to be restrained.
Yes. The Zohar looks forward to the days of the Messiah, when the rainbow will be transformed. It will be adorned in bright colors, like a bride adorned for her husband, and the world will be illuminated.
And that signifies?
That signifies the covenant is fully established. Malchut is finally raised from the dust of exile and fully rectified into the panem panem state. The entire emphasis shifts from restraining judgment to radiating unadulterated mercy.
So now we can trace Noah's lineage forward past that instability of the early world and toward the true stability that was achieved by the patriarchs. The structural instability of the acre world had to be replaced by a stable, unified architecture. And the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are the ones who build that stability by establishing the bond of faith.
True faith, Emunah, in the Zoharic sense, isn't just belief. It's identified as the secret of the supernal faith, which is Bina, understanding.
The mother of the lower Partsufim.
Yes, and the source of the flowing river of souls. The patriarchs had to ground this abstract concept of Bina into a stable spiritual structure right here in the physical world.
And each patriarch seems to represent one of the columns required to perfect this structure, creating the ultimate tikkun that the antediluvian generations completely failed to achieve.
That is the essence of the triad that replaces the initial flaw. Abraham represents the right column, cheesed mercy, associated with water. Isaac represents the left column, Gevurah judgment, associated with fire. These are polar opposites.
And the inherent spiritual risk there is that if these opposites just clash, they recreate the conflict of the Shavira, the shattering of the vessel. So the breakthrough has to be the integration of these two forces. That integration is what defines the perfection of faith.
It's a concept known as hitkavlut, the inclusion of the columns within each other. The perfection of faith happens when, for instance, the right is included in the left and the left is included in the right. This inclusion process is the spiritual bedrock of the new stable world order.
Can we look at a specific application of this? Where do we see fire included within water and water included within fire in the foundational story of the patriarchs?
The most dramatic and famous example is, of course, the binding of Isaac, the Akedah. This was the moment where the power of Gevurah Isaac's side, fire, strict judgment, was included and submitted within Chizd, Abraham's side, water, unconditional mercy, to execute that judgment.
So the act of total submission.
The willingness to sacrifice was the spiritual force that included fire within water.
And the reciprocal action, the other way around.
That happens when Abraham later gives all that he had to Isaac. This symbolized the right column, Chizd, being included within the left column, Gevurah. This reciprocal movement, where mercy flows into judgment and judgment is tamed by mercy, creates a structure that is simultaneously firm and loving, restrictive and expansive. This is the stability that Zion lacked in the acre-be-acre state.
So the patriarchs' lives are not just biographical stories. They are the actual creation of a stable Trinitarian spiritual mechanism that can handle the flow of the Hirat Gir, the great lights that were blocked during Katnut.
Exactly. And the one who joins it all together, the one who is the central column, is Jacob. Jacob is Tiferet, the column of beauty or truth. He arrived to join Chizd Abraham, and he placed Gevurah, Isaac, in the middle, successfully mediating the two opposites.
And Jacob's synthesis placing Gevurah in the middle, that finally connects the bond of faith, Bina. That synthesis is the essential difference between the collapse of the antediluvian world and the stability of the post-flood era.
It stabilizes the spiritual house. The early generations were living in a temporary back-to-back lean-to, susceptible to any gust of chaos. The patriarchs built the permanent spiritual dwelling, complete with a central column that ensures that judgment, Gevurah, is never unmediated. And that allows Zion to finally achieve a permanent panem be panem state, at least in the world of Atzilut.
It is truly astonishing how this esoteric reading transforms Genesis 5 from a simple list of names and lifespans into this detailed spiritual roadmap of humanity's initial flawed attempts at rectification, all culminating in the integrated faith of the patriarchs.
And we have to remember that the Zohar insists this purification of the world is a universal task. It transcends any individual lineage. All souls in the world, the sources teach, come from that flowing river, which is Bina, the secret of supernal faith. The correction of the patriarchs initiated has universal implications.
And the ultimate goal of Tikkun, the repair, is not exclusive to one nation.
No, the final destiny of Malchut, the cup of blessing, is destined for all nations to flow to it. This ultimate unity transcends all boundaries of gender and nation. While the patriarchs established the inner foundation for stability, the work has to expand outward to encompass all of creation.
So, to synthesize this profound deep dive into the Zohar's interpretation, the antediluvian world was fundamentally defined by separation, that acre-be-acre state, which was triggered by the serpent's manipulation of the divine feminine principle.
And that spiritual architectural flaw led directly to Katnut, the withdrawal of the great lights, and the prevalence of harsh judgment of Din, which all culminated in the flood.
Noah then functioned as a kind of cosmic life raft, initiating a necessary spiritual reset. But the true, enduring rectification of the divine presence of Malchut required the methodical, integrated faith structure established by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Their work was the crucial move from structural flaw to spiritual stability. It was achieved through the reciprocal inclusion of mercy and judgment, and it achieved the goal that Adam and all his early descendants had failed to reach.
And ultimately, the Zohar is telling us that our spiritual journey today is fundamentally linked to this very same cosmic task. The original failure of Adam was this inability to maintain that perfect face-to-face, panem be panem state with the divine, which led to the spiritual structure's collapse.
And now, as the Zohar states, the Shekinah, the matron, has gone into exile with us, leaving the divine palace in ruins. Our spiritual work, our mitzvot, our internal striving, it's all the work of helping the king and nature return to their palace and restoring those ruins. It makes the most personal, humble act deeply consequential to the cosmic structure. We are reversing the acre-be-acre state, one deed at a time.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought drawn from the deepest strata of the Zohar. The mountain of Hashem's house, which is a structural component of Malshut, is described as the good extracted from the very source of the failure, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but without the evil component. So if the initial creation of humanity was meant to extract pure good from that tree of knowledge, what specific form of spiritual practice, beyond the ritual acts we know and beyond the ancient method of Iber that was exemplified by Enoch, is necessary for us today to finally and definitively extract that pure, unmixed good and complete the true unification?
Something to chew on. Something that connects your soul work directly to the repair of the cosmic architecture until our next deep dive.
Sound disappears, but the wisdom contained within remains as light. Today's deep dive ends here. Producer Talmud K, and we'll see you next time with deeper insights. Peace be with you all.
Peace be with you all.
알겠어. 진짜 말로 하는 게 아니야.